Earth, a Love Story. Written and read by Robin Lassiter. Chapter 3. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this, too, was a gift. Mary Oliver. I know that I'm romanticizing my childhood. I was spared how poor we were, how my parents were just 20-year-old kids who didn't have all the answers as they struggled with raising their young family while in the middle of becoming their grown-up selves. I didn't spend summers mourning the field of corn, embodying the hours and hours of labor and hope my folks had poured into it, obliterated and shredded by a single 15-minute hailstorm. I was sheltered by our small porch, delighted, watching the hail as it popcorned in the front yard. I didn't spend winters worrying about the pipes freezing. I was warm, reading by the fire, and in spring I was engrossed in watching kittens being born. Fall found me studying the red ants stalking their larders. Nature was my teacher, and according to nature, the totality of life included both suffering and joy. And there was no reason to think that wasn't as it should be. It's just part of the deal here. There's another kind of suffering, though, and that kind has always knocked me sideways. I'm so very sensitive, and there is a dumb, cynical, unnatural suffering that comes from the rules and fears and armored hearts that we all carry. To this day, I find that kind of suffering completely shocking, and can you blame me? There is an order that makes sense here on this planet, and then there's a bunch of nonsense. From my beautiful childhood, I was heavily inoculated against the suffering that comes as part of the natural order of things. The nonsense, dumb suffering, though, the irreconcilable, ridiculous, meaningless suffering, ravaged me. It ravages me still. I didn't know what to make of it or what to do with it, and no one else seemed to be as affected as I was. I never knew how to hold my pain and in what proportion. My suffering has seemed small, insignificant, petty and puny, not worthy of my tears, and also large, suffocating, drowning, devouring, and threatening to obliterate me. My suffering has been paradoxical, both little and vast. Without being able to reconcile its size or value, without knowing how to put it properly in its place, to decide if I'm over or under reacting to my pain in relation to the pain of the world, I defer to Viktor Frankl, who is horribly, uniquely qualified. Suffering, he writes, completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. Now, with proper perspective, with my memory restored, I know that suffering is a sacred calling. My agony beckons me into the journey to become a tested and tempered warrior, able to withstand the pain in the world which galvanizes me to withstand the love. Understanding the sanctity of suffering doesn't buffer me from it, but knowing that it has profound meaning has made me pay very close attention and glean from it all I can. It is my best teacher and holds the key that opened the secret doorway into my tender, naked heart. With the arrival of the first moment that I have as a conscious memory, the wheel of my evolution began to turn. I had arrived into a chaotic maze perfectly designed to develop and hone my consciousness. There were many gifts of my childhood, but 3 that it took me a long time to see as gifts, and 3 that really shaped me the most deeply and significantly. These are my soul gifts. The first time I suffered is my first conscious memory. We were in the loft and my mother was smiling, content, her hands folding laundry pulled down from the railing where it had been hung to dry, when suddenly we were both hit with my father's unrest. He was upset, loud, and it was about me. He was angry that I was still in diapers. I only know that my earliest memory was when I was 2 years old, because that's what he said. She's 2 years old, for Christ's sake. My father is looking at me with his curled lip, spitting words at me, disgusted, and the energy of his repulsion hits my body like a wave of sickness, and I am suddenly afraid, alert, and here's something new to feel, a hot shame. My heartbeat thudding in my chest. What is this? Until that moment, I had no idea I could be anything other than as I was. I was unified inside of my beingness. There was no duality. It had never occurred to me that in my simple existence, I was somehow innately wrong. Before this moment, there was not even a sense of myself as a separate unit from my environment. I was the waters I was swimming in. Now, suddenly, I have a body. I am aware of myself in it. I look down and see that I am naked except for a diaper. With some shock, I see myself from the outside, how I must look to my mother and father and sister and anyone else who happens to look at me. This is the first time the world was unsafe by virtue of me simply existing as I am in it. I immediately externalized how I should feel about all of this. How would I know? I was 2. This was new. I watched my parents closely to learn exactly how to engineer my reprieve from the terrible feeling of shame. I felt my mother defend me, calm, placating. She'll come along in her own time. I felt myself align with her. Yes, it's fine, my own time. I watched myself, already a ghost echo a half step out of sync, turn my gaze from my mother, looking from her to my father to see how he received this obvious truth. My father threw up his hands and walked back down the stairs, angry. It didn't matter what my mother said. He was repulsed. I felt his disgust viscerally, like a blast of cold air, and I aligned myself with that too. My heart beat cold and hard. It wasn't just his opinion that caused adrenaline and confusion to run through me. This was my first shock, other than the forgotten shock of my soul being birthed into this place, and it fractured me. I was splintered, split, separated. In the same instant I became conscious of myself, I detached from myself. Not completely, but just enough to not be fully inside or fully outside of my body. I was an in-between person, watching myself have experiences, observing them, and then looking to others for clues about how I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to do. This initial fall from the grace of unconsciousness into the grace of consciousness was my first gift. My father wasn't a bad person. This wasn't some horrible sin. This is just what happened. This is just how I reacted to a moment in time. On the one hand, I was good, entitled, protected, and on the other hand, bad, wrong, defective. I was so young when I first abandoned myself and over such a little thing. And here's something really interesting. In the moment that I abandoned myself, I also abandoned my mother. She was safe, but clearly not all-powerful enough to save me from whatever this was. It was my father who held the real power, the power to annihilate me. He therefore must hold the power to put me back together. All of this began my journey of seeking rescue from exile. That exile, a naked nerve, sealed itself into a thick, slick skin of shame and embedded deep into the pit of my stomach. My identity began to form around it, and it calcified into this needful plea, into my first soul gift. Rescue me. If someone could just explain the rules, tell me how to be good, teach me exactly what to do to earn my way back into the garden, I would happily comply. Do you want my hands? Here, take them. My thrumming heart, it's yours. My gurgling guts will spill for you. There is nothing of me without the safety you provide, so take my raw meat and do with it what you will. From then on, I was only seeking outwards, ever on the lookout for proof of my goodness or badness, continually weighing each experience to understand where to put it. Which am I? Does this make me bad or good? What should I do to be seen as perfect? How can I bend my nature to make sure I experience less of the repulsion, less of the disgust, the wrongness, and more of the safety and relief of perfection? More praise, please. More affirmation. Please notice how I did the thing. Please smile. Please approve. Please reassure me. I'm good, aren't I? Am I? Okay. Okay, I can breathe, but not for long. Now again, please. Please reassure me again. Am I lovable? Is my existence okay? Do you hate me? Am I safe? I had instantly become so exquisitely aware that my essential self in its natural unfettered state carried an inherent wrongness, and the only way to resolve that was to learn what it meant to be right. It was a perfect setup to bring me over and over towards engaging with complexity, with the doubleness of both and, instead of the ease and simplicity of either or. It provided an incessant friction that fueled my search for resolution of that paradox. The second soul gift that I chose for this life was a deep connection to unseen worlds. My father helped me with this gift too, and it was an act of pure love. Bedtime stories were all journeying and magic and myth. He would tuck me in and then begin to create the world. I adored this time together, of course, and I so wanted to do a good job. When he began to tell me a story, describing the pathway that would take us into the woods, I focused and squinched my eyes shut tight and tried hard to make it as real as possible. I strained to hear every word and catch every inflection. We created this world together, him through his telling of it and me through my desire to inhabit it with him. It was my first true act of devotion, and through it I learned what it was to create, to pray, to focus my attention and will and watch what could come of that. His story brought us into a dark forest, walking together down a path and coming upon a huge tree stretching up into the sky, so high we couldn't see the top. This is Yggdrasil, he would say. This is the tree of life. Her crown is in heaven, and from there we can see everything. Her roots reach down into the underworld, and her trunk is warm and alive and here with us on earth. We came to the base of our tree, and I could smell the rich, fertile earth full of rot and life and earthworms and fungus and fecund darkness. Making our way around her huge trunk, fingertips dragged against rough, hairy bark, we noticed she was on the edge of a little ravine. We picked our way down through velvet ferns and bright toadstools and stood in front of her great, solid, gnarled roots cascading down from above. My father revealed to me, tucked in between the roots, tiny, exquisite wooden doors. They were carved and colorful, stained with berries and grasses, with ornate little handles and knobs. Pick a door, he said, and pick a dream to dream for the night. On bright sunny days, my father taught my sister and I to cloudburst. We'd lay on the ground or on one of the big flagstone benches along the walkway to the dome and find a smallish cloud, maybe the size of a quarter if you held it out at arm's length against the blue sky. Focus, girls, he'd say. Imagine all of the molecules, all of the tiny water droplets gathered there. Can you imagine an easier thing to influence? Imagine them getting farther and farther away from each other. Make space between the atoms. Send them to join up with that big cloud over there. My sister and me would squint into the bright sky and concentrate hard, and before you knew it, the little cloud would get shaggy and sparse, and pretty soon it was gone altogether. Papa, how do we know that all little clouds don't do this? I asked. Maybe they all do it, but we can't know because if we look at them, they just fly apart and we don't know if it's us or if that's just how clouds are. Yep, he laughed. You're right. There's just no way to know for sure. I took that unsatisfying answer and spent my time trying to both look and not look at clouds out of the corner of my eye to see what they did. My mother taught us the more common magic of nature. She pointed out impossibly small, light blue eggshells at the base of a big tree and brought us back the next week to hear the cheeps and watch the parents come and go with insects trapped in their pointy beaks. She showed us how to plant beans, poking a hole in the soft dirt she'd spent hours sifting and turning, making sure we didn't go too deep or not deep enough. Don't plant those seeds upside down or the beans will grow to the center of the earth, she'd tease. We came back each day to check to see if they've sprouted and leave disappointed until finally we arrived one morning to find rows of bright green leaves erupting out of the earth. And we'd celebrate and dance and sing and gently push straw around them to keep them from drying out in the hot Colorado summer sun. My mother planted strawberries next to rhubarb and showed us how they were both ready at the same time, and then she'd bake us a pie in the wood cook stove, getting started early in the morning so the heat would dissipate by the time the heat of the day came on. For a lot of years in our little world, there was no TV or phone, and the nearest neighbor was a mile if you went straight up and over the ridge to the south, so it was really just us. Just my mom and dad and sister and nature all around. There was nothing to desensitize me from the world. Everything was already magic. There wasn't anything veiling it. Red-tailed hawks and magpies and ravens and horses and baby chicks and snakes and elk and bears. And that time a mountain lion screamed, and swear to God it sounded exactly like a woman screaming. So much so that my dad took the dogs and the gun and started climbing the ridge to put a stop to whatever was going on up there. But when the mountain lion screamed again, the dogs hightailed it home and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he knew it was a lion and he went home too. The scenes and unseens were abundant in our little valley. There were the guardians, the old trees who kept watch and moved while you weren't looking, the ravens who flew between worlds, couriers of souls, and the coyotes who sang lurid songs trying to tempt our dogs to their deaths. And there was Pan. Yes, that Pan. Pan, the god of mountain wilds with cloven hooves and lyrical flutes sinuously played in a minor key that beckoned me into the dark forest on the north-facing side of our valley. He was alive there, but invisible, as gods become when there are not enough people who remember them. He was not young anymore. He didn't leap from rock to rock with his coquettes flowing and tittering behind him. There was a sorrow to him, a melancholy and a resignation that permeated the dank hillside and the thick woods where the snow melted last. Pan was wild and musky and powerful. He was insistent and beckoning and forbidden, but part of the natural world, so not so intimidating to me as he would have liked. In fact, I had his number and I knew it. He needed me as much as I needed him. He fostered my wildness, breathing his hot breath on the tiny glowing embers of my natural self. I fanned the embers of his very existence with my belief and willingness to interact. He woke me up on hot summer nights and enticed me under the big juniper over by the barn. We foraged tiny, sweet, wild strawberries and sucked nectar from red trumpet flowers, and I wove pine needles into pretty patterns in his matted coat. I guess he could be called my imaginary friend, except he wasn't imaginary. He got all tangled up with the other beings in our valley, and by the time I was old enough to make my way out into the world, my only recognition of and devotion to him was the sorrow I felt when I looked under the juniper tree and saw the drought had stolen our strawberries. This initiation into other worlds ensured that I did not get trapped in this one. I escaped into the realer than real experiences of my dreams, into the dark forest, into the inexplicable and surreal. This was the landscape of my childhood before I had words to put to it, when each new experience was just that, a new experience. I didn't know yet what was unusual, what was weird or other. I didn't know what to question or doubt. Everything that happens at that age gets integrated as reality. How would I know it as anything else? I had nothing to compare it to. The other part of this second gift was that it was a confusion of truth and fiction. Pan was real in those woods. I could feel his presence and I simply knew his existence. The experiences I had with the cranes and the visitors and the leaving my body, the flying and the dreams and the dead people that I'll tell you all about, those were all real. I know they were real because I experienced them. I lived them. I felt them in my body. I knew what a dream was, and I knew when I was awake. The journeying with my father was real, and his stories of the sharecropper's house he grew up in, all made of windows because windows were cheaper than walls, that was true. The 19 days he spent by the Green River in Utah, fasting, drinking river water, sleeping under his father's wool army blanket and hoping for some big revelation about life that never came, that was real. The night he spent pressed up a rock wall in Arches near Moab, and there was a terrific lightning storm, and he woke up surrounded by a herd of deer, the antlers all lit up blue with electricity. Real. The 6 bright lights that he saw flying low to the ground, coming directly at him and then splitting to streak around him as he was driving home one night on Highway 12. Real. It dawned on me later that this happened very near to my own experiences that would take place much later in life, when I found myself aboard craft or watching an orb drift across the sky and then make a sharp 90-degree turn before shooting out into space. The teepee he lived in on our land before he built the dome, the way he found our land driving around in his old Chevy truck, using the I Ching laid open on the seat next to him, directing him across the country. Should I turn left here or right? True, that happened. My mother finding my father in the laundromat just as she was surrendering to her life and defying her family and friends and culture and moving out into the wilderness to be, literally, barefoot and pregnant and live off the land and raise chickens and a family. Real. My parents created a world for us inside and out. They built our home and the bridge we used to cross the arroyo to get to the garden and the barn where we kept the bridles and hay. They built the bridge I used to cross into the other worlds too. There was a lot of bullshit though. My dad would look at me and my sister real serious when we went out riding after a big snow and tell us to look out for snow snakes. Snow snakes come out when the wet snow collects on the ponderosas, so be extra careful when you ride in the woods. They'll drop right out of the trees and land on you in that little space between the collar of your coat and the back of your neck. He'd squirm around and shiver and shudder at the thought. My sister and me always rushed through the forest on those snowy days and kept one eye up. He also went out in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve until I was 11, with skis on, and made sleigh tracks in the snow and jingled big bells under our bedroom windows and left Daisy BB guns on the couch for us from Santa. He made us believe. Seriously, it was a lot of effort, and we believed for far too long. To this day, when my sister and I tell these stories of our childhood, my father giggles until he can't breathe. He loves what he gave us. It was wonderful. And it was confusing. It's my second gift. It's a beautiful gift. I don't think I would have survived without the magic of it. The magic of ordinary life. For more information, visit honeyheart.org.